He was the coldest man she'd ever met, until she found him half dead in a snow-covered barn, burning with fever, whispering the name of a woman who wasn't her. For 2 days, Maggie nursed the ruthless cowboy back from the edge, feeding him stories of cinnamon rolls and oceans she'd never seen. But when he opened his eyes, looked at her like she was the only thing keeping him alive, and told her he was falling in love, she did the unthinkable. What she said next shattered him completely. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Brock Whitmore didn't believe in second chances. He believed in land, cattle, and silence. He believed in what could be controlled with the bite of a command or the clink of a coin. And he believed in isolation, the kind earned, not chosen, when every relationship had soured, every betrayal cut deeper than the last, and every room was easier to enter when no one else was in it. He hadn't always been like that. Once, a long time ago, there had been softness, at least the bones of it. But grief is a sculptor, and in the years since Elise died, Brock had let it chisel him down to something harder, leaner, and infinitely colder. His ranch was his fortress. 40,000 acres of unforgiving Wyoming terrain, stitched with fences, bloodlines, and contracts. From the outside, Whitmore Ranch was a monument. Crisp, brutal architecture set against rolling hills and sky that never ended. Inside, it was immaculate, yet lifeless. The kind of silence you couldn't break with music, only disrupt briefly with footsteps or the clink of whiskey in glass. Brock ran it all with precision and fear. His employees followed orders, not out of loyalty, but because no one dared cross him. Not after what happened to the last man who tried to cut corners on the feed contract. Brock didn't yell. He didn't need to. His power was quiet, permanent, unquestioned. Then Maggie Lee walked into his kitchen, and everything changed. She arrived in the middle of a windstorm, late, covered in mud, and unbothered by either. Her boots tracked wet dirt across the kitchen tile as if she owned the place. She was small, sure, but not delicate. The kind of woman whose strength didn't shout. It coiled behind her eyes, waiting. Brock glanced at the clock. 22 minutes past the hour. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "You're late." She looked up, not sheepish, not defensive, just tired. "Jackknifed rig on Route 89, she said, brushing wet hair out of her face. "The plows haven't cleared it yet. Took the service road behind the canyons to get through. Sorry about the mess." Her voice was low, gravelly, with a Chicago edge she didn't bother sanding down. She surveyed the kitchen with casual detachment. Marble countertops, industrial stove, copper pans no one touched. A room designed for function but never used for family. "Nice setup," she said. "You cook in here, or is this just decoration?" Brock's brow twitched. "Out here," he said, each word slow, carved in ice. "We don't tolerate weakness." She paused only for a moment. "Then it's a miracle you've survived this long." Silence. The kind of silence that shouldn't have existed between two strangers. It wasn't awkward. It was something else. Tense, charged, like a standoff. He could have fired her right then. Any other woman, any other mouth. He should have. That's what he told himself as he stood, towering over her, hat in hand, hands stiff at his sides. Instead, he stared at her like something he couldn't name. She didn't flinch, just pulled her coat tighter and stood there, waiting, daring him to make a decision. He turned without a word and left the room. Maggie exhaled, but it wasn't relief. It was irritation. She hadn't come for charity. She needed this job. She needed the check, and she hated, viscerally hated, that it depended on a man like him. 2 hours later, she stood scrubbing dried grime from a baseboard in the front hall when one of the ranch hands passed her with a smirk. "You last longer than the last two," he said, nodding toward the upstairs landing. "They were gone before sundown." Maggie looked up, eyes unreadable. "I don't scare easy." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "You'll learn. Whitmore's not a man. He's a winter with boots." That night she sat alone in the attic quarters assigned to her. Bare walls, iron-framed bed, thin mattress. She unpacked a single duffel, work clothes, 3 books, a picture of a boy with 2 big eyes and 2 thin shoulders. Her brother, Jamie, 16, barely staying in school, caught with the wrong people too many times in a city that didn't forgive mistakes. She touched the photo briefly before placing it on the nightstand, then stared out the frost-glazed window. The ranch below was dark except for a single window glowing gold in the main house. His study. Of course. She didn't need to know him to understand him. Men like Brock Whitmore weren't hard to figure out. They were hard to endure. Cold men didn't start out cold. They just ran out of places to bleed. But that wasn't her problem. The next morning, Maggie was up before dawn, already sweeping the front steps when Brock came outside. He stopped mid-step when he saw her, brows low, lips tight. "You're early," he muttered. She shrugged. "Out here, I hear you don't tolerate weakness." He stared at her again. Too long. Something unspoken passed between them. Not warmth, not understanding, but recognition. He turned, walked past her, and said nothing more. But for the first time in years, the boots that stomped across Whitmore Ranch that morning were just a little less steady. By midwinter, the winds had stripped the trees bare and polished the plains to a sheen of ice. Snow pressed against the Whitmore Ranch like a white fist, silent and heavy. Inside the house, warmth seeped from the stone hearths and the hum of electric radiators. But it was Maggie Lee who filled the air with heat. Brock hadn't asked for and couldn't turn away from. She was chaos in motion, loud in a house bred for whispers, opinionated in a world that rewarded silence from women like her. She rearranged the pantry on her second week, replaced the aging ranch cook's instant mashed potatoes with garlic chive ones she made from scratch. Brock didn't comment, but he noticed. He always noticed. What grated him most wasn't her disregard for his rules. It was her ease, how she moved through rooms he'd designed to intimidate, not to inhabit. She left her books on end tables, used mugs in the sink, boots in the hallway. She made the mansion feel lived in, which to Brock felt like invasion. So, he retaliated. Quietly, methodically. He assigned her to the worst tasks. The stables during snow squalls, the cellar floors, cleaning the grease trap in the mess hall kitchen, places designed to break lesser hires. Maggie didn't break. She scrubbed, swept, sorted. Then she'd hum. Sometimes soft blues, sometimes gospel, sometimes a song he couldn't place but couldn't forget. It echoed down the halls long after she passed. The ranch hands adored her. She knew their names, their stories. She baked cinnamon buns on Sundays, said it was a church tradition even if she hadn't stepped inside one in years. She'd tied a kerchief around his neck and was guiding him, gently, in wide, clumsy circles. "Two-step, partner," she whispered. "You lead." The dog barked. She laughed, and Brock, watching from the window, felt a strange tightness in his chest. Not pain, not warmth, something between. But for all her light, there was shadow. He followed her one Wednesday under the pretense of ranch business. She left before dawn, took a back road into Laramie. He kept his distance, saw her park near a derelict church with a crumbling cross, watched her pull an envelope from her coat and push it through the mail slot. She stood there after, hands in her pockets, forehead against the door like she was praying to something long dead. Brock left before she saw him. That night, over dinner, he offered her a thick envelope of his own. No ledger, no transaction, just money. "For your brother," he said, not looking up. "And whatever that church cost you every month." She didn't touch it, didn't speak for a full beat. Then, her voice low and firm, "I clean your floors, not your conscience." She walked away before he could reply. The envelope stayed on the table all night. Later, when Brock passed the kitchen, he found it open, emptied of its cash and replaced with a note. "Use it to fix the back barn, unless that's too close to charity." The penmanship was small, the ink smudged where the paper had been folded tight. Brock stood there, fingers curled around the envelope, and realized with a kind of bitter clarity, Maggie Lee had drawn a line not just between them, but through him. She hadn't humiliated him. Worse, she'd seen him, stripped down past the money, past the control, and judged what she found with brutal honesty. And he? He resented her more with every hour. Because the truth, however much he hated it, was this: he had never wanted someone to stay so badly in his life. The snow came in silence, as it always did at Whitmore Ranch. Soft at first, like a whisper through cotton, then heavier, suffocating. The wind howled low and cruel, dragging the cold through every crack in the woodwork. The generators sputtered and failed sometime in the night. Pipes froze. Lights flickered once and went out. The house fell into darkness, and the cold settled in like a punishment. Maggie lit candles, one by one, in the hallway, on the stairs, on the mantel. Her hands trembled, not from fear but urgency. Something was wrong. Brock hadn't come in for supper. She'd seen him that morning, shoulders hunched against the wind, coat wrapped tight, heading toward the southern barn. A fever had clung to his skin for 2 days already. He'd been pale, irritable, moving like his bones ached. But he wouldn't rest, wouldn't let her help. Said he had fences to check. Said the horses needed water. Now the wind howled louder, like it was calling for something to die. She found him collapsed between 2 stalls, one arm tangled in the hay net, the other stretched toward a frozen water bucket. His breath came shallow and ragged. His skin was fire against her hands, but his lips were already turning blue. She didn't scream. Screaming wasted time. She wrapped him in horse blankets and dragged him through the snow. Each step toward the house was a battle. By the time they reached the porch, her knees buckled beneath him. She got the fire roaring, peeled off his soaked clothes, wrapped him in quilts and sat beside him, wiping the sweat from his brow with the sleeve of her flannel. He muttered nonsense, names she didn't know, words that sounded like regrets. Maggie stayed. Through the night, through the day, through another night. She whispered to him, stories of her mother's cinnamon rolls and how they always burned on one side. How she dreamed of seeing the ocean, not from a plane, not in a photo, but for real. Salt on her lips, toes in the sand. On the 3rd night, Brock stirred. His eyes opened, wild, blinking against the low flicker of firelight. She was there, curled beside him on the floor, chin on her chest, asleep mid-sentence. And something in him broke, not the way a branch breaks, the way a dam bursts. He sat up, weak, trembling, and looked at her, not as a maid, not even as a woman, but as the only real thing in his life untouched by transaction or performance. She hadn't done this to earn favor. She hadn't run when it got ugly. She had stayed, and in staying, she'd done something no one else ever had. She'd witnessed him. Not the landowner, not the hard bastard with cattle and guns. Just Brock. Sick, shaking, human. When she woke, He was watching her. "You should rest," she said, voice raw with fatigue, but he didn't look away. "I can't. Keep this in." His voice cracked like frozen wood in the fire. "Maggie, He swallowed. "I think I'm falling for you." A silence followed, one that stretched too long, that bled into something tight and dangerous. She stood fast. "No, you're not." Brock blinked, confused. "What?" She shook her head. "You don't love me, Brock. You love what I make you feel. Warm, seen, safe. But that's not love. That's relief." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "I've been someone's relief before," she said, quieter now. "And when their world stopped burning, so did I." She left him sitting there by the fire, fever cooling, heart splitting along fault lines he hadn't known existed. And for the first time in his life, Brock Whitmore couldn't fix it, couldn't negotiate, dominate, or buy his way through. Because love, he was learning, wasn't a deal. It was surrender, and he had no idea how to give it. The storm didn't announce itself. It simply arrived, unforgiving, unrelenting. By the time the ranch hands realized it was more than a squall, it was too late to leave. The wind howled like it had teeth, peeling shingles from the barn roof, clawing against shutters and window panes. Temperatures fell like a blade. And inside the ranch house, the generator sputtered once, then died. Darkness consumed the rooms like ink poured over glass. Pipes groaned, floorboards stiffened, and still, Brock hadn't come in. Maggie waited. At first, she told herself he'd be back any moment, just clearing the line, checking the gate, doing something too important to mention. But as the minutes dragged into hours, the quiet turned hostile. The fire dwindled. Her gut twisted. She pulled on her coat, boots, gloves. The wind slammed the door open before she could touch the handle, and for a second, she nearly turned back. But she didn't. She found him in the southern barn, buried beneath a saddle blanket, curled like a man half his size. One hand was clutched tight around a broken thermos. His lips were pale, skin fevered. A ragged cough clawed its way out of him, but he didn't stir. He looked small. That was what shook her. Not his condition, his size, his smallness. The man who towered over everyone, whose presence filled rooms like smoke, had been reduced to something breakable. She didn't hesitate. She wrapped him in 2 wool blankets, dragged him step by step through knee-high snow, breath hitching with every heave. Her arms burned, her lungs screamed. But she didn't stop, not for a second. Inside, the house felt colder than the wind. She lit the fire, boiled water over the stove with a match and patience, peeled his soaked clothes off layer by layer, slow, clinical, careful not to violate his pride. She wrapped him in every blanket she could find, draped warm towels across his chest, held his hands, rubbed his fingers, whispered until her voice cracked. He drifted in and out of fevered half-sleep, muttering names. Elise, mostly. Sometimes numbers. Once, just silence. On the second night, she began telling stories. Not because he was listening, but because it helped fill the silence she hated more than the cold. She told him about her mother's cinnamon rolls, how the first batch always burned because she forgot the timer, and how no one ever cared. How she and her brother would eat them anyway, icing and all, still warm from the pan. She told him she'd never seen the ocean, never left the Midwest. How sometimes, when traffic in Chicago got real quiet late at night, she'd pretend the sound was waves. He never responded, but his hand twitched once when she mentioned the cinnamon. By the third night, Maggie was asleep on the floor beside the fire, curled under a throw blanket, lips parted slightly, hair wild from exhaustion. A candle guttered nearby, casting low shadows against the stone hearth. Brock stirred, blinking. Then again, he sat up, slow, aching, disoriented. His vision cleared, and there she was. No apron, no clipboard, no yes sir, just Maggie, asleep by the firelight, arms curled under her head, body shivering slightly despite the blankets. He watched her like a man remembering something he'd tried to forget, and he realized, sick, stripped bare, heart pounding too fast in his chest, that he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of waking up and finding her gone. He didn't think, couldn't. His voice came out hoarse, nearly foreign. "Maggie?" She stirred, blinked, then shot up, scrambling to his side. "You're awake. God, don't move, just—" "I'm fine," he rasped, or close to it. Their eyes locked. It was the first time he'd seen her afraid. Not of him. For him. "I thought you were gonna—" She trailed off, shaking her head, eyes glassy. And then, too sudden, too exposed, he said it. Not like a declaration, more like a fracture. A confession pulled from a place he didn't know existed. "I think I'm falling for you." The words landed like a dropped glass, sharp, irreversible. Maggie froze. Not the kind of pause that holds warmth, the kind that means run. Her face tightened, not with anger, with grief. "No," she said. "No, you're not." Brock blinked. What?" She stood, fast, like the air had turned toxic. "You don't love me, Brock. You love what I make you feel, safe, seen, like maybe you're not the monster you've built yourself into." "That's not fair. It's true." Her voice didn't rise. It dropped, like a blade. "I've been someone's anchor before, their salvation, their soft place to land when the rest of the world got too hard, but they never loved me. They loved how I made them feel about themselves." He reached for her hand. She stepped back. "I can't be that again." And then, she was gone. Just like that. And Brock Whitmore, man of control, discipline, command, was left beside a dying fire, wrapped in too many blankets, burning with something no fever could explain. He had finally offered something real, and she had walked away, not out of cruelty, but because she knew the difference. And now, so did he. The ranch had never felt so still. After Maggie left, the house reverted to what it had always been, silent, ordered, lifeless. The rooms stood cold despite the firewood that burned day and night. Brock moved through them like a shadow, efficient, mechanical, soulless. He barked at the ranch hands, drove his horses harder, ate alone, slept little. Even the dogs kept their distance. It wasn't new behavior. But now it was unbearable. Because now he knew what warmth felt like. He had known the sound of her laugh ricocheting off the kitchen tiles, the smell of cinnamon and soap that lingered where she walked, the fire of her presence, unafraid, in a home that devoured softness. She had changed the architecture of his solitude. Now that she was gone, even the silence accused him. Then came the letter. It was folded in quarters, no return address, only his name scrawled across the envelope. Inside, her handwriting, sharp and fast. "They took my brother. The debts weren't paid in full. I'm going to fix it. Don't follow me." But he did. He left the ranch without a word. No foreman, no plan, just a destination, just her. It took him 3 days. Nebraska blurred past in miles of snow and diesel smoke. He found her in a roadside truck stop outside Scottsbluff. The place smelled of burnt coffee and broken dreams. She sat in a booth near the back, lips split, knuckles raw. Her brother, no older than 16, clutched a cup of cocoa with both hands, eyes wide, haunted. Brock said nothing at first, just sat across from her, laid down a check, the kind of number that could make men disappear. He didn't mention debts, or gratitude, or redemption. He simply said, "I'm here." And she broke, silently, without tears. Her shoulders dropped, her jaw unclenched. She let herself be small, just for a moment. Back on the ranch, days passed in quiet. She spoke little. Brock didn't push. He let her roam the land, sleep late, cook or not. She tended to her brother. He rebuilt the old barn with his own hands. Then came the cinnamon roll. Maggie found it on the kitchen table at dawn, still warm. The smell hit her like a memory. Bitter, beloved. Her mother's recipe. Imperfect. A little burnt on the edge. She turned. Brock stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "I don't know how to be warm," he said, voice low, throat tight. "But I'm willing to learn, if you'll teach me." Maggie crossed the floor without a word. Her eyes found his. No performance, no forgiveness, just truth. "Then we'll both learn," she whispered. "Together." He didn't touch her. Not yet. She stepped into his arms. And for the first time, Brock held someone not to possess, not to protect, but to stay. No fireworks, no declarations, just two broken people choosing not to run. Outside, the snow began to melt. Just a little. Enough.